You know that dream where you save up $1 million, quit your job, and spend the rest of your life sipping cocktails while money magically appears in your bank account? Yeah, that's a complete fantasy. And today I'm going to show you why believing that lie could actually cost you your freedom. And what we're covering isn't some feel-good motivation nonsense. This is the brutal math behind passive income that nobody wants to talk about. We'll dissect why the famous 4% rule is quietly destroying retirement plans in 2026. I'll show you the 25 times trap that keeps people working 5 extra years for luxuries they don't even enjoy. And most importantly, why millionaires still feel broke and what that means for your financial future. If you've been following personal finance advice online, you've probably heard this story before. Save 25 times your annual expenses, withdraw 4% per year, and boom, you're financially free forever. But here's what they don't tell you, that math was built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. Let me paint you a picture of 3 different people. The first guy saves exactly $1 million and quits his corporate job. 18 months later, he's literally begging for his old cubicle back. The second person retires with $3 million in dividend stocks, but spends 40 hours every month managing his portfolio and dealing with tenant phone calls at midnight. The third person calculates she needs $2.4 million to retire safely. She hits that number, then suddenly decides she actually needs $4 million because now she wants a boat and business class flights to Europe. What's the common thread? They all believed the same fundamental lie about passive income. They thought it meant you stop working and money just appears. The reality looks nothing like the YouTube advertisements, and the psychology is even more brutal than the math. Today, I'm going to completely dismantle the myths around living off passive income and show you what actually works in reality. We're going to break down the 3 genuine versions of passive income that exist, not the fantasy ones. I will explain why the famous 4% rule is quietly failing people right now in 2026, and reveal the 25 times trap that keeps you working 5 extra years for expenses you don't even enjoy. Most importantly, we'll dive into why people with 8-figure portfolios still feel broke and panic about spending $5 on coffee. This isn't some motivational speech about following your dreams. This is about the actual mechanical systems that either give you genuine freedom or create a new kind of prison with better furniture. Before we get into the heavy math and psychology, make sure you stick around for the second half, because that's where we'll explore the mind games that sabotage even perfect financial plans. Also, if you appreciate content that respects both your intelligence and your wallet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's honestly the best return on investment you'll get today. Let's start with something everyone thinks they understand, the 4% rule. Back in the 1990s, a researcher named William Bengen ran extensive analysis on historical stock and bond returns. He discovered that if you have a diversified portfolio, withdraw 4% of it in your first year of retirement, then adjust that dollar amount for inflation each year after, you have roughly a 95% chance of not going broke for 30 years. The math seems beautifully simple. Take your annual spending, multiply by 25, and that's your freedom number. Need $40,000 a year to live? You need $1 million invested. Need $80,000? $2 million. On a spreadsheet, this looks absolutely bulletproof. But here's where things get messy. Bengen used data from 1926 to 1992. You know what that data set includes? The greatest bull market in human history, post-World War II American economic dominance, interest rates that actually paid you decent returns for holding bonds. The 4% rule isn't some law of physics. It's a probability calculation based on a very specific and historically favorable moment. Morningstar, the investment research firm, has been quietly revising these numbers downward. In some of their recent analyses, they've suggested that 3.3% might be safer for someone retiring today. Think that's just a minor adjustment? Let's run the actual numbers. If you need $40,000 a year to live, and the truly safe withdrawal rate is 3.5% instead of 4%, you don't need $1 million. You need $1.14 million. That's an extra $140,000 you have to accumulate, which could represent 3 more years of your life working, all because the math shifted by half a percentage point. Here's what makes this even more problematic. The 4% rule is not even passive income in the traditional sense. You're actively selling pieces of your portfolio every year. You're systematically liquidating your assets, just betting that whatever remains grows faster than you can spend it down. Now, inflation adds another layer of complexity that most people completely underestimate. Let's say you retire today with $1 million and pull out $40,000 in your first year. Feels great, right? But if inflation runs at just 3% annually, which is actually below the long-term historical average in 20 years, you'll need roughly $72,000 just to buy the same groceries and pay the same utility bills that cost $40,000 today. If your income source is fixed, like from corporate bonds or an annuity that pays a set amount, you're effectively getting a pay cut every single year without even realizing it. This is why people who retired on fixed corporate pensions from the 80s are struggling now. The number looked huge in 1985, but it barely covers basic expenses in 2026. The total return model, where you own broad index funds and sell small pieces annually, has one massive advantage over fixed income. Stocks have historically outpaced inflation over long periods. They act as a natural hedge because if you own a slice of global business and those businesses raise prices, your portfolio theoretically grows along with inflation. But this comes with a significant price: volatility. You have to be emotionally comfortable watching your $1 million portfolio drop to $700,000 and still sell $40,000 worth of shares to pay your rent. Most people simply aren't wired for this kind of psychological pressure. When they see their life savings crater right after quitting their job, they panic, sell everything at the bottom, lock in massive losses, and completely destroy their entire plan. The math works on paper. Human psychology is where it all falls apart. This brings us to a critical insight that most people miss. Flexibility is actually worth more than having a bigger pile of money. If you can adjust your spending down to 3% of your portfolio during bad market years and 4% during good years, your odds of success don't just improve by 10%. They roughly double. Think about two different scenarios. Guy number one retires with exactly $1 million and a completely fixed $40,000 annual budget. The market drops 25% in his first year. He's forced to sell $53,000 worth of shares just to extract $40,000 in cash because those shares have lost value. Now he's sitting on only $747,000. Another bad year, and he's mathematically finished. Same guy, same $1 million, but he has a freelance skill that can generate $20,000 if absolutely needed. Market crashes, he pulls $20,000 from his portfolio and earns $20,000 from freelancing. His portfolio burn rate just got cut in half. 5 years later, when markets recover, he's not just surviving, he's actually thriving. The second guy didn't have more money. He had optionality, which turned out to be far more valuable. Now you might be thinking, I don't want to sell stocks when they're down. I want pure cash flow. I want rental income and dividends that just appear so I never have to touch the principal. That's the dream everyone sells you, right? Mailbox money. But if you think the stock market math is challenging, wait until you see the trap waiting in the world of pure cash flow investing. This is where most people underestimate the true cost by about 50%. The cash flow model is incredibly seductive because it feels more tangible. You own 10 rental properties generating $4,000 a month. You have a massive dividend portfolio sending quarterly checks. Maybe you have royalties from intellectual property. In this model, you theoretically never sell the golden goose. You just live off the eggs it lays. On paper, this feels infinitely safer than the withdrawal method because you're not depleting your principal. You still own the real estate. You still own the dividend stocks. If the market crashes, you theoretically still collect your rent checks. It feels robust and permanent. That feeling of safety is exactly why people rush into cash flow investing without doing proper due diligence. Here's the massive trap that catches almost everyone. Revenue is absolutely not the same thing as income. I cannot stress this point enough. Some guy buys a duplex that rents for $2,000 monthly. He tells everyone he has $24,000 in passive income. Wrong. That's gross revenue. From that $2,000, you have to subtract property taxes, insurance, vacancy periods, repairs, property management fees if you don't want to be a hands-on landlord, and major capital expenditures like roof replacements, HVAC systems, and foundation work. Once you account for all these real expenses, your actual net cash flow might be closer to $600 or $700 monthly, not $2,000, and that's before paying income taxes on the profits. To replace a $40,000 salary with genuine net rental income from properties you own free and clear, you might need 8 to 12 units, depending on your local market conditions. Congratulations. You're not a passive investor anymore. You're a property manager with a very expensive hobby that happens to generate some income. Let me share a real story about someone who learned this lesson the hard way. He bought 6 rental properties over 10 years and got to the point where net income covered his basic living expenses. Quit his engineering job feeling financially free. 6 months later, he was spending 15 hours every week dealing with contractors, tenant disputes, city permits, and maintenance issues. One tenant stopped paying rent entirely. The eviction process took 4 months, during which he received no cash flow from that property, but all the expenses kept coming. He told me, and this is a direct quote, "I traded a boss I hated for 6 tenants who text me at 11 p.m. because the garbage disposal is making noise." He went back to part-time engineering work within a year, not because he ran out of money, but because he ran out of patience. Real estate can absolutely scale and generate solid returns, but it's rarely truly passive unless you pay a professional management company, which typically eats another 8 to 12% of your gross rental income. The math can still work for some people, but the psychology is completely different than what most expect. You're essentially buying yourself a job that the IRS happens to classify as passive income, but your calendar will definitely disagree. The same principle applies to dividend investing. You think you're just clipping coupons and depositing checks, but what you're actually doing is constantly researching which high-yield stocks aren't value traps in disguise, rebalancing when yields drop, and monitoring for potential dividend cuts. If you're spending 10 hours monthly on this, you're working. It might be more enjoyable than your corporate job, but it's definitely not passive. The solution isn't to completely avoid cash flow assets. It's to treat them as a stabilizer for your overall plan, not the entire engine. The most successful early retirees I know personally use a hybrid approach. They maintain a core portfolio of low-cost index funds for long-term growth and systematic withdrawals, then layer in some reliable cash flow to cover absolute essentials. For example, maybe your rental income covers groceries and utilities, the truly non-negotiable expenses. This way, if the stock market crashes and your portfolio gets hammered, you know you can still eat and keep the lights on without being forced to sell shares at huge losses. The cash flow doesn't need to cover your entire lifestyle, just enough to let you sleep peacefully when your stock portfolio is down 30%. Here's the part that completely breaks people's brains once they understand it. Your spending habits are roughly 10 times more important than your investment returns. Most people obsess over earning an extra 1% on their portfolio, but I'm going to prove why cutting your expenses by 1% is actually worth double that in terms of actual freedom. Every single dollar you spend annually requires $25 of invested capital to support it indefinitely, assuming the 4% rule holds up. Think about that for a moment. Your monthly Netflix subscription isn't just $15. It represents $180 annually, which means you need $4,500 invested and working for you just to pay for Netflix forever. A $500 car payment represents $6,000 annually. You need $150,000 in your portfolio just to sustain that single line item indefinitely. When you view your expenses through this lens, luxury doesn't just cost the price tag. It costs years of your life accumulating the backing capital to support it. That $60,000 truck doesn't really cost $60,000. It costs the additional time you'll need to work to accumulate roughly $1.5 million to support a lifestyle that includes $60,000 vehicles. Most people never run this calculation, then wonder why their freedom number keeps mysteriously moving higher. There's a useful concept called the passive financial independence ratio. It's simply your passive income divided by your total expenses. If you spend $40,000 yearly and have $10,000 coming in from dividends or side projects, your ratio is 25%. You're 1/4 of the way to complete financial independence. Here's what's fascinating. You don't need to hit 100% to start feeling significant benefits. At 30% coverage, let's say your passive income covers rent or mortgage payments, your risk tolerance changes completely. You can consider a pay cut for a more fulfilling job. You can tell your boss no without sweating about making the mortgage payment. At 50% coverage, you could theoretically work part-time doing something you actually enjoy rather than just tolerate. You're no longer working purely to survive. You're working to thrive and build the life you actually want. The psychological trap here is lifestyle creep, or what I call the moving goalpost problem. I've watched this happen repeatedly in real time. Someone hits $500,000 net worth, which was their original target. Suddenly, they decide they need a full $1 million. They hit $1 million and now convince themselves they need $2 million because they want a boat and business class flights. If your spending rises in lockstep with your passive income growth, you never actually achieve freedom. You're just running on a faster, more expensive treadmill while wearing nicer shoes. The people who successfully pull this off are the ones who can freeze their lifestyle at a reasonable level. They decide what enough genuinely looks like and ruthlessly defend that number against marketing, peer pressure, and their own ego. I know a couple in their early 50s who retired with $1.2 million. Not a massive number by today's standards. They live in a completely paid-off house in a medium cost of living area. They calculated their annual spending at $34,000. They grow vegetables, cook most meals at home, and take road trips instead of European vacations. Their withdrawal rate stays comfortably under 3%. They've been retired 6 years, never run out of money, and never felt deprived of anything meaningful. I asked them what their secret was. The wife said, "We decided we liked each other more than we liked impressing neighbors. Their life doesn't look like an Instagram advertisement, but it looks exactly like freedom." Here's the protocol for mastering this. Focus obsessively on the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Your savings rate is the single biggest determinant of when you can achieve financial independence. Save 10% of your income, and you're looking at 4 decades of mandatory work. Save 50%, and you can compress that journey to 12 to 15 years. It sounds extreme until you realize it's just mathematical reality. Every dollar you do and spend creates a double benefit. One more dollar invested in your portfolio, and one less dollar that portfolio needs to generate forever. Attack the spending side first because it's the only variable you can control completely today. Now we need to discuss the monster hiding in every passive income plan, something that can destroy even perfectly calculated strategies if you ignore it. It's called sequence of returns risk. And if you don't understand this concept, you could save diligently for 30 years, hit your target number, quit your job, and still go completely broke within 5 years. It all depends on what the market does the day after you submit your resignation. Sequence of returns risk means that the specific order of your investment returns matters just as much as the long-term average. Let's say you expect 7% average annual returns over 30 years. If the market crashes 20% in the first 2 years of your retirement while you're simultaneously withdrawing money to live, you dig a hole so deep that your portfolio can never mathematically recover, even if markets boom later. You're forced to sell shares at rock bottom prices just to buy groceries, which permanently destroys your capital base. Conversely, if you retire into a bull market and get strong returns in your first few years, you become practically invincible because you have more capital working for you during the good times. Let's run actual numbers on a catastrophic sequence. Imagine you retire with exactly $1 million. In year one, the market drops 20%. Your portfolio shrinks to $800,000, but you still need your $40,000 to live. Now you have $760,000 remaining. Year two brings another 10% market decline. Your portfolio drops to $684,000. You withdraw another $40,000, adjusted for 3% inflation, so $41,000. You're left with $643,000. In just 24 months, you've burned through more than 1/3 of your entire life savings. To get back to even, the market would need to go on an absolutely historic tear, but you have significantly less capital remaining to catch that potential recovery ride. This is why simple average return calculators are extremely dangerous for retirement planning. They assume smooth, predictable returns when the actual market resembles a roller coaster built during an earthquake. The psychological component of sequence risk involves panic. When you watch your life savings drop 25% right after quitting your job, every human instinct screams, sell everything and go to cash. But selling at the bottom locks in devastating losses. It's the financial equivalent of a death blow. It's relatively easy to be a long-term investor when you have a steady paycheck coming in. It becomes psychological torture when your portfolio is literally your oxygen supply. Here's the battle-tested protocol for fighting sequence risk. Maintain a cash buffer. Keep 1 to 3 years of living expenses in cash or short-term bonds when you first retire. If the stock market crashes in year one, you don't sell a single share of stock. You spend from your cash reserves and live off savings while letting your equity positions recover. Historically, market recoveries take 2 to 4 years. Once the inevitable rebound happens, you replenish your cash buffer from the recovered portfolio. This system acts like a shock absorber for your entire plan. Yes, holding substantial cash slightly reduces your long-term returns, but it buys you crucial insurance against being forced to sell stocks at a 25% loss just to buy a sandwich. It's the difference between merely surviving market volatility and actually thriving through it. We've covered the money mechanics and mathematical realities, but there's one final hurdle that almost nobody discusses until they face plant directly into it. It's the primary reason why many people achieve financial independence and then voluntarily return to work within 18 months. It has absolutely nothing to do with inflation or investment returns. It's about what happens to your brain when the alarm clock stops mattering. There's a crucial distinction in the FIRE community between retiring from something versus retiring to something. If you're just running away from a job you hate, you'll likely crash and burn once the initial relief wears off. 1 week at the beach represents paradise. 1 year at the beach becomes an existential crisis. Humans derive enormous amounts of identity, social status, and sense of purpose from their work. When you strip that away suddenly, you're left staring into a psychological void. I've personally seen people with $2 million spiral into depression because they completely underestimated their need for structure, challenge, and meaning. The myth suggests that humans are naturally designed for endless leisure. We absolutely are not. We're problem-solving machines. Without meaningful problems to solve, we start inventing artificial ones. You might find yourself obsessing over lawn maintenance or arguing with strangers on social media just to feel some sense of engagement and purpose. The most successful people in the passive income world don't actually stop working entirely. They stop doing work they hate and shift to completely optional work. Maybe they start a passion business, volunteer for causes they care about, or consult on their own terms. The goal isn't to do nothing forever, it's to have complete autonomy over what you choose to do with your time. This brings us to the concepts of lean FIRE versus fat FIRE. Lean FIRE means your passive income covers bare bones survival. You can eat and maintain shelter, but you're counting every penny, and one car repair becomes a genuine crisis. This approach is stressful and fragile. Fat FIRE means your passive income covers a luxurious lifestyle with substantial margin for error. Obviously much safer, but it takes roughly twice as long to accumulate the required capital. The sweet spot for many people is what I call coast FIRE. You reach a baseline level where survival is completely guaranteed by passive income, but you continue doing some form of enjoyable work to fund luxuries and keep your brain engaged. The work becomes truly optional, which changes the entire power dynamic. Let me tell you about someone who executed this perfectly. He worked in software development, saved aggressively, and hit $1.4 million at age 42. His bare minimum annual expenses were $35,000. His FIRE ratio at a 3% withdrawal rate was 120%. He was mathematically free. But instead of retiring to a beach somewhere, he started a small software consultancy, works maybe 20 hours per week, picks his own clients, charges premium rates because he can afford to say no to bad projects, and clears another $60,000 annually doing work he genuinely enjoys. His portfolio keeps growing. He's not technically retired in the traditional sense. He's liberated, which is actually much better. The final protocol is this: design the life you want before you design the portfolio to support it. Don't race blindly towards some arbitrary number, hoping happiness will be waiting at the finish line. Test drive your retirement vision. Take a sabbatical if possible. Develop hobbies and interests that don't revolve around consumption. Build income streams that align with your genuine interests, not just your bank account balance. If you can construct a life you don't desperately want to escape from, you might discover you don't need nearly as much passive income as you initially thought. You just need enough to purchase your autonomy and options. So can you actually live off passive income? Absolutely, but stop searching for one magic bullet strategy. It's an interconnected ecosystem. You build a foundation of low-cost index funds to capture global economic growth. You layer in some semi-passive cash flow like rental properties or dividend stocks to provide stability and cover essentials. You maintain a cash buffer to handle inevitable bad years without panic selling. Most importantly, you keep your skills sharp and your options open. The most financially secure people aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest pile of money. They're the ones who remain flexible and adaptable. They can scale their spending down or scale their income up depending on whatever the world throws at them. The mathematics are honestly straightforward once you understand the principles. The psychology is where most people struggle and ultimately fail. Your biggest enemy isn't market volatility or inflation. It's the voice in your head constantly telling you that you need more. More safety, more luxury, more status symbols. That voice will keep you working until you're 70 if you allow it to control your decisions. Here are your 3 key takeaways from everything we've covered. First, your freedom number isn't 25 times your current spending level. It's 25 times your absolute minimum spending requirements. Learn to distinguish between wants and genuine needs. Second, build flexibility into every aspect of your plan. Develop a side skill you can monetize if necessary. Maintain that cash buffer we discussed. Flexibility consistently beats having a slightly bigger portfolio. Third, test your retirement lifestyle before you quit your job permanently. If you can't fill a 3-day weekend without spending money or feeling bored, you're not ready for retirement. You might be ready for therapy to figure out what actually brings you fulfillment. The people getting genuinely rich off passive income aren't the ones obsessing over optimizing for another 0.5% of yield. They're the ones who figured out what enough looks like for their specific situation and stopped moving the target every time they hit a milestone. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the realities of passive income. If you found this valuable, hit that like button so the algorithm shows this to more people who need a reality check about these topics. And make sure you're subscribed because we regularly break down complex financial topics without the typical hype and nonsense you see elsewhere.